The formation doctrine that the People's Liberation Army Air Force developed over the decade following 2015 is not a secret. Its broad architecture has been analyzed in open-source defense publications and inferred from satellite imagery of PLAAF exercise patterns over the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. The concept is straightforward in its logic and deeply sophisticated in its implementation. The J-20 Mighty Dragon does not need to carry the longest-range missile in the formation. It needs to find the target. The J-16 strike flanker, carrying 6 PL-15 rounds with a 200-kilometer engagement range, provides the reach. The J-20 provides the eyes. Together, the formation creates a layered engagement architecture that no single platform doctrine can replicate. A 5th-generation sensor forward, 4th-generation firepower behind, the whole connected by a data link that makes the physical separation between the two aircraft operationally irrelevant. The vulnerability in that architecture is the same vulnerability that exists in every layered system. If the sensor is found, the geometry collapses. At 7:18 a.m. over the Taiwan Strait, the sensor was found at a range the PLAAF had not planned for. The strait on this morning was clear below 12,000 feet, with a scattered high overcast at 28,000 feet that reduced the visual acquisition range between aircraft but left the radar picture uncluttered from 30,000 feet upward. The USS Theodore Roosevelt was operating 240 nautical miles southeast of the strait, its air wing conducting flight operations in the Philippine Sea. The F-35Cs of VFA 147 had been on the CAP station since 6:40 a.m., a 2-aircraft section holding at 35,000 feet on a racetrack pattern that put them 80 nautical miles northeast of the strait's median line. The E-2D Hawkeye working the northeast sector had been building the picture since 6:55 a.m. when the first contacts appeared on the western side of the strait. The picture it built was consistent with PLAAF or AF standard training operations, a mixed formation of contacts climbing from Longtian Air Base, departing on a bearing of 088 east toward the strait. The characterization process began immediately and produced, within 4 minutes, a contact assessment that the Hawkeye controller marked as significant before transmitting it to the CAP section. 8 contacts with J-16 emission profiles. Clear KLJ-7AAESA radar signatures, large radar cross-sections consistent with the J-16's airframe, climbing through 24,000 feet at Mach 0.91. Formation spread, a staggered line abreast covering 140 kilometers of frontage. The J-16 formation was not subtle. It was not designed to be. Its role in the formation doctrine did not require stealth. It required range, payload, and the ability to receive a targeting solution from forward and act on it immediately. The 4 contacts that the J-16 formation was designed to obscure were not on the Hawkeye's display at 7:02 a.m. They were there. The AN/APG-81 found them at 7:18 a.m. The F-35C's sensor fusion architecture merges data from the APG-81A ESA radar, the DAS distributed aperture system, the EOTS electro-optical targeting system, and the electronic warfare suite into a single integrated picture. In clean sky at altitude, with the APG-81 operating in a low probability of intercept mode that maintained the F-35C's electronic silence while still building a tactical picture, the fusion algorithm cross-referenced a persistent low-amplitude radar return at bearing 266 with a faint infrared trace from the DAS's Western Quadrant camera. Neither return was sufficient alone to trigger an automated contact declaration. Together, cross-referenced across 2 sensor modalities at a consistent bearing and a consistent altitude, they produced a contact probability that the fusion system flagged at 7:18 a.m., bearing 266, range 218 kilometers, altitude estimated 31,000 feet. 4 contacts. Separation, approximately 15 kilometers between aircraft. The radar cross-section values associated with the returns were the number that made the lead look at the display twice. Not a J-16 cross-section. Not a J-10 cross-section. Something smaller. The APG-81's return against these 4 contacts was producing values in the range of 0.08 to 0.14 square meters, an order of magnitude below any 4th-generation fighter in the PLAAF inventory. An order of magnitude below anything except one airframe currently in PLAAF operational service. The lead keyed the tactical discrete. Sentry, Falcon lead. I have 4 low observable contacts bearing 266, range 218, altitude estimated 31,000. RCS values inconsistent with any 4th-generation platform. Assess possible J-20. Request correlation. The Hawkeye controller's response came in 11 seconds. The Hawkeye's own picture showed no contacts at bearing 266, range 218. The APS-145 radar on the E-2D was not seeing what the F-35C's fusion architecture was seeing. At 218 kilometers against a target with a radar cross-section in the 0.1 square meter range, the APS-145's detection probability in these atmospheric conditions was below the threshold for reliable track. The F-35C was resolving contacts that the most capable airborne surveillance radar in the U.S. Navy's inventory could not confirm. This was the operational reality of 5th-generation sensor fusion against a peer stealth platform. The detecting platform would frequently be the only platform that knew the contact was there. The tactical consequence was equally clear. The 4 contacts at bearing 266 did not know they had been detected. At 7:18 a.m., the J-20 formation's own sensor picture showed 2 F-35C contacts on the cap station. The Hawkeye's Link 16 data confirmed that the J-20s had acquired the F-35Cs on their own sensors at approximately the same time. The J-20's KWS-1A ESA radar, operating in a mode designed to reduce its own detection probability while maintaining search capability, had resolved the F-35C CAP at a range the pre-mission planning had assessed as consistent with their expected detection performance against a 5th-generation target. What the J-20's sensor picture did not include was the information that the F-35CS had detected them. At 218 kilometers, the J-20 crews assessed themselves as undetected. Their doctrine for this phase of the engagement called for the stealth screen to close within optimal datalink range of the J-16 formation, while remaining undetected by the defending cap. Then pass the targeting solution to the J-16S and hold position outside the cap's effective engagement range while the J-16S released their PL-15 rounds. The geometry the J-20 crews were building toward assumed they were invisible at 218 kilometers. They were not invisible, and the consequences of that assumption would shape the next 19 minutes. At 7:19 a.m., the lead transmitted the contact data to the wingman on the tactical frequency. The wingman's fusion architecture cross-referenced its own returns from bearing 266 against the lead's data transmission, and produced a correlated track within 4.1 seconds. 2 aircraft, 2 sensor packages, 2 independent detection events at the same bearing and range. The statistical confidence of the contact assessment moved from the fusion system's initial 71% to 89% in under 5 seconds of correlation. 4. J-20s. 218 kilometers. Altitude 31,000 feet. Not yet aware they were being tracked. The J-16 formation was 340 kilometers to the west of the F-35Cs and closing slowly. At current speed, the J-16S would reach the PL-15S optimal release range in approximately 22 minutes. The J-20 stealth screen was positioned 120 kilometers ahead of the J-16 formation, closing the gap between itself and the defending cap at Mach 0.94. The tactical picture had a geometry that the PLAAF formation doctrine had not accounted for. The sensor pass had happened in reverse. The F-35Cs knew the J-20s were there before the J-20s knew they had been detected. The question was how to use that information without revealing that it existed. The lead descended, not dramatically. A gentle nose-down attitude, speed building from Mach 0.97 to Mach 1.08 as the F-35C traded altitude for airspeed on a new vector of 255, slightly south of the J-20 formation's bearing, a geometry that would close range while presenting a different aspect to the J-20's KWS-1 radars. The wingman matched the vector without a radio call. The descent placed both F-35Cs at 30,500 feet, 500 feet below the J-20 formation's estimated altitude, a geometry that made the F-35C's own radar cross-section even smaller to the J-20's downward-looking sensors. The APG-81 remained in low probability of intercept mode throughout the descent. No active emissions at standard power. The EW suite was listening, cataloging, building the electronic portrait of 4 KWS-1 radars and 8 KLJ-7A radars at 2 different ranges and 2 different bearings. The electronic picture was rich. The J-16s were broadcasting their presence across the electromagnetic spectrum in the same way the J-16 formation doctrine intended, drawing attention toward the 4th-generation firepower, while the 5th-generation sensor worked in relative quiet. At 7:24 a.m., the first friction event, the F-35C wingman's APG-81 fusion feed dropped the southernmost J-20 contact for 38 seconds. The contact had maneuvered, a shallow turn left that changed its aspect angle by approximately 22 degrees, presenting a portion of its airframe geometry that the J-20's stealth shaping handled better than the frontal quarter. At 190 kilometers range against a target with a radar cross-section that was already near the detection threshold, a 22-degree aspect change was enough to push the return below the fusion algorithm's confidence floor. The contact was not gone. It was not trackable by the wingman for 38 seconds. During those 38 seconds, the wingman relied on the lead's track data via the Link 16 feed and maintained its own vector. When the wingman's fusion reacquired the contact at 7:24 a.m. and 49 seconds, the 4-contact picture was rebuilt within 2.3 seconds of reacquisition. But the incident flagged something the debrief would spend considerable time examining. The J-20's stealth performance at aspect angles 15 to 30 degrees off the frontal quarter was measurably better than the pre-mission intelligence had modeled. The 0.08 to 0.14 square meter range that the APG-81 was measuring from the frontal quarter may not have been the J-20's average cross-section across all aspects. It may have been its best-case aspect. The J-20's designers had thought carefully about which angles a defending radar would approach from. At 7:26 a.m., range to J-20 formation, 162 kilometers. The J-20 crews were now 56 kilometers closer to the F-35Cs than they had been at initial detection, still on their original heading, still building toward the optimal datalink range at which they would pass the J-16 targeting solution. Their own sensor picture showed the 2 F-35C contacts on the cap station racetrack, a picture that was becoming stale because the F-35Cs had departed the racetrack 7 minutes earlier and were now 41 kilometers southeast of where the J-20 picture showed them. The J-20 crews were tracking ghosts. Real position, unknown to them. At 7:27 a.m., the lead activated the APG-81 at standard LPI power against the nearest J-20 contact, designated as Contact 1. Range 159 kilometers, altitude 30,800 feet, speed Mach 0.93, heading 088. The LPI fire control solution built in 5.1 seconds, slower than against a large non-stealth target at this range, the algorithm requiring more processing time against the smaller cross-section. Solution confidence at 5.1 seconds, 61%. 61% was below the employment threshold. Not because the physics required it, an AIM-120D released at this range with a 61% solution could theoretically guide to intercept. Because the rules of engagement for this geometry, this political context, and this specific contact assessment required a higher confidence threshold before an active employment action was taken. The threshold, 75% minimum. At 159 kilometers against a J-20 in LPI mode, 75% required closer range or a better aspect. The lead continued closing. At 7:29 a.m., the J-20 formation changed course.
Not a dramatic maneuver. A 12-degree right turn, noses moving to bearing 100, a subtle adjustment that altered the formation's approach geometry relative to the Taiwan ADS median line. The turn was consistent with PLAAF exercise doctrine for a stealth screen reaching its optimal datalink positioning range. The formation was rotating to a bearing that would keep it outside the ADIZ boundary, while its sensor coverage overlapped the airspace where the J-16 PL-15 rounds would be flying. The turn was planned. It was also the turn that changed the J-20's aspect relative to the F-35C's approach vector from 12 degrees off-frontal to 34 degrees off-frontal. 34 degrees off-frontal on the J-20, a worse stealth aspect. The APG-81 returns on contact 1 brightened from 0.11 square meters to 0.31 square meters in 1.8 seconds as the new aspect geometry stabilized. The fire control solution rebuilt. Solution confidence at 7:29 a.m. and 22 seconds, 79%. Above threshold. Range, 141 kilometers. The wingman's solution on contact 3 simultaneously reached 76%. Above threshold. Range, 144 kilometers.
2 J-20s. 2 valid fire control solutions. Neither J-20 crew aware that the picture had reversed 11 minutes ago. The second friction event arrived at 7:30 a.m. in the form of an electronic event that the AN/ASQ-239EW suite flagged immediately. A new emission from bearing 266, co-located with the J-20 formation, at a frequency and pulse pattern that the threat library characterized in 0.6 seconds as a J-20 data transmission uplink. The J-20 formation was transmitting its targeting solution to the J-16 EOS. The data link was active. The J-16s were receiving the F-35CS estimated positions from the J-20s outdated sensor picture. The J-16s were receiving coordinates that were 41 kilometers stale. But the data link uplink had a consequence the lead noted immediately. The emission was detectable. The J-20 had broken its own electronic silence to transmit the targeting data. For the duration of the uplink, which the EW suite was logging as a compressed, encrypted burst of approximately 1.4 seconds, the J-20's emission profile was no longer consistent with a fully passive stealth platform. The uplink hadn't given the J-16s a valid firing solution on the F-35CS, but it had given the lead a precise location event on contact 1 with an accuracy the LPI fire control returns alone could not have provided. At 7:30 a.m. and 12 seconds, contact 1's position was known to within 800 meters. Fire control solution confidence on contact 1, 83%. Range, 138 kilometers. At 7:30 a.m. and 31 seconds, the APG-81 went to full tactical power on contact 1.
Not LPI, not passive. A deliberate full-power AESA lock, the radar's transmit power stepping up to maximum output, the beam narrowing to a high-resolution track mode that covered contact 1 with the electromagnetic equivalent of a spotlight. The fire control solution reached 91% confidence in 1.1 seconds. AIM-120D parameters. All green. Range 137 kilometers. Well within the AIM-120D's engagement envelope against a cooperative target. At the outer edge against a maneuvering, low cross-section target in a terminal guidance scenario that had never been operationally tested.
The J-20 crew's LWS-20 laser warning system, the J-20's equivalent of an RWR for active radar illumination, received the APG-81's full power emission in 0.3 seconds. The characterization of the emission source, high-frequency AESA, frontal aspect, 137 kilometers, tracking mode. Not a search sweep. Not an ambiguous return. A fire control track from a bearing the J-20 crew's own sensor picture showed as empty. The J-20 lead pilot's response was fast and it was correct. A hard left bank, 4G, nose pulling south, presenting the J-20's most favorable stealth aspect to the tracking radar while simultaneously increasing the range on the engagement bearing. The maneuver was executed smoothly, without hesitation, by a pilot who had been trained for exactly this scenario. The wing partner, Contact 2, mirrored the turn in the opposite direction, the two aircraft splitting to deny a single fire control solution to both simultaneously. The lead matched Contact 1's turn with a 3G bank south, maintaining the aspect geometry that the fire control solution required. The wingman turned north to maintain tracking geometry on Contact 2. The formation had split into two independent pursuit geometries in the span of 4.1 seconds. Contact 1's radar cross-section cycled through values as the J-20 maneuvered. 0.11 square meters at the best stealth aspect, 0.44 square meters at the side, 0.31 square meters as the aircraft rolled through its turn and presented a briefly exposed underside geometry. The APG-81 tracked through the maneuver, the solution confidence fluctuating between 76 and 89% as the cross-section changed, not dropping below threshold. Tracking. At 7:31 a.m., the KWS-1 radar on Contact 1 went active. Full power, fire control mode, pointed at the lead's bearing. The J-20 pilot had decided that passive stealth was no longer his advantage in this geometry. He had been found, he was being tracked, and his best remaining option was to generate his own fire control solution and understand whether the engagement had options beyond retreat. The KWS-1's detection range against the F-35C's frontal radar cross-section at this geometry, unknown, because the F-35C's radar cross-section performance in operational conditions against a peer AESA radar had never been confirmed from the outside. The classified estimate, the KWS-1 at this range, at this aspect, would require between 4.1 and 11.8 seconds of dwell time to build a trackable return against the F-35C's frontal cross-section. That range of uncertainty was 7.7 seconds wide. It was the most consequential uncertainty in the engagement. The lead did not wait to find out which end of the range was accurate. At 7:31 a.m. and 14 seconds, with Contact 1's KWS-1 active and building toward a solution, the lead transmitted on guard frequency. Dragon formation. Dragon formation. You are being tracked by U.S. Navy aircraft at 131 kilometers. Your targeting solution is invalid. Our position is not where your picture shows. You are inside weapons employment range. Reverse course immediately. The guard transmission was not required by the geometry. The fire control solution was valid. The ROE was satisfied. The transmission was a choice, the same category of choice that had preceded every non-kinetic intercept conclusion in the operational record, a professional communication to a peer crew in a peer aircraft that the geometry had resolved in a way their pre-mission brief had not anticipated. The J-20 lead pilot's response arrived in 7 seconds. The KWS-1 went to standby. Contact 1 continued its south turn, now passing through bearing 180, heading directly away from the lead's position. Contact 2 reversed similarly. Contacts 3 and 4, which had held their eastbound heading during the initial maneuver, turned northwest, back toward the Longtian bearing. The J-16 formation, 198 kilometers to the west, registered the J-20s course reversal on the formation datalink. The KLJ-7A radars on the lead. J-16 elements went to standby within 14 seconds of the J-20 reversal. The J-16S did not yet turn. They held their heading for 41 seconds, a trained crew assessing whether the J-20 reversal was temporary or definitive before the formation lead began a right turn northwest. The J-16S were going home. The lead maintained full power track on contact 1 through the reversal, watching the range numbers climb. 134 kilometers, 139 kilometers, 146 kilometers. The fire control solution remained valid to 160 kilometers as contact 1 accelerated northwest. The KWS-1 in standby, the J-20's retreat geometry, adding range at approximately 580 meters per second. At 163 kilometers, the solution confidence dropped below the employment threshold as the J-20's frontal stealth aspect was now presented directly at the tracking radar in retreat geometry, and the cross-section dropped back towards 0.1 square meters. The lead released track at 7:34 a.m. Contact 1, 169 kilometers, northwest, not returning. The wingman released contact 2 at 7:34 a.m. and 22 seconds. Both J-20 elements were egressing. The J-16 formation was at 210 kilometers and reversing. The Taiwan Strait sector was clearing.
At 7:35 a.m., the lead transmitted. Sentry, Falcon lead. 4 J-20 contacts egressing northwest, range 171 and opening. 8 J-16 contacts reversing, range 212. ADIZ boundary not approached. Fuel state bingo +9. Returning to Marshall.
Bingo +9. The descent, the 19-minute closing vector, and the sustained maneuvering had drawn fuel at a rate the pre-mission planning had modeled only for kinetic scenarios. Bingo +9 was workable. The lead began the turn toward the Marshall stack at 7:35 a.m. The operating cost of both F-35Cs across 71 minutes of combined flight time, approximately $14,200. The intelligence collected during 19 minutes of direct J-20 observation, cross-section measurements across 4 aspect angles, KWS-1 emission characterization, datalink burst pattern analysis, formation maneuver response timing, was a number that would be expressed in updated threat assessments and revised detection range models for every future engagement against this airframe. The J-20's stealth performance at 34 degrees off the frontal aspect, measured. The KWS-1's detection timeline against the F-35C, bounded, though not resolved. The datalink uplink signature during the targeting transmission, cataloged and cross-referenced against previous collection. Every number collected during 19 minutes of passive and active engagement would narrow the confidence bands in the intelligence assessments that the next crew to face this formation would rely on. The debrief aboard USS Theodore Roosevelt ran 3 hours and 20 minutes. 3 findings defined the session. First, the J-20's initial detection at 218 kilometers by the F-35C's multi-modal fusion architecture against a target that the E-2D Hawkeye's APS-145 could not resolve, validated the operational case for forward-deployed stealth platforms in a contested strait environment. A non-stealth response aircraft launching from the same cap station would have been detected by the J-20's KWS-1 before closing to detection range on the J-20 formation. The geometry would have been reversed. The J-20 datalink solution would have been valid. Second, the 38-second contact 4 track loss during the J-20's 22-degree aspect change updated the J-20's estimated stealth performance envelope. The cross-section values at aspects 15 to 30 degrees off frontal were better than the pre-mission model had predicted. The update would narrow the confidence band in the threat assessment, but in the less favorable direction. The J-20s detection threshold range in operational conditions was shorter than the 218-kilometer opening event suggested. Under different atmospheric conditions, or from a different approach geometry, the opening detection range might have been 160 kilometers, or 140. The margin that had made the geometry work today was real. Its size was less certain than the engagement's clean outcome implied. Third, the J-20 lead crew's split maneuver response to the full-power APG-81 lock, executed in 4.1 seconds, correct geometry, mirror brake with the wingman, indicated a crew that had specifically briefed and trained for a lock detection response from a peer stealth platform. Not a generic defensive reaction, a rehearsed counter. The PLAAF formation doctrine had anticipated that its stealth screen might be found and had prepared a professional response. The response had not changed the outcome, but it had demonstrated that the adversary's pre-mission planning was not built on the assumption of permanent invisibility. That finding was the one the pilots would think about on the flight back to the ship. 4 J-20s, 8 J-16 and 35,000 feet. 218 kilometers from first fusion contact to engagement initiation. 19 minutes from detection to both formations egressing. A DIZ boundary not crossed. Ordnance employed, 0. Valid fire control solutions achieved. 2 confirmed, above threshold, not employed. J-20 stealth cross-section measured across 4 aspect angles. Updated. Message to the PLAAF formation planning staff. The sensor passed in the wrong direction. The screen was seen before it could see.
At 8 a.m., the Taiwan Strait above the median line was clear. The high overcast at 28,000 feet was unchanged. The surface traffic in the strait, container ships, bulk carriers, the ordinary commercial density of the world's busiest waterway, was unchanged. From any vessel below, the sky showed nothing. There had been nothing there. There were never supposed to be anything there.
The radar tapes said otherwise. They always do.